When there's no love story, when Eros is not a value, you have emptiness, you have pseudo-Eros. Whether it's the postmodern version of pseudo-Eros or the fundamentalist version of pseudo-Eros, they both produce destruction. Our response has to be the overriding moral imperative of this time, like it was for Da Vinci in the Renaissance, which was a time between worlds and a time between stories. In this moment, in this breach, we have to actually articulate, to research, to deepen, to write, to clarify the evolution of the human story, which is reality is a love story. No one's outside of the love story. Love is the value of Cosmos, the Eros value. We all participated in that story. We all have unique contributions to that love story. That love story is evolving. It's clarifying all the time. That's the universal love story. I know that we're dealing with apocalyptic problems, but does everyone have trouble like your glasses just aren't clean and like the whole world seems like fuzzy because of that, and you realize, oh, it was just my glasses? Oh my God. How many people are having glasses issues? Any glasses issues happening in the world? I know glasses, right? Oh my God. So glasses issues means, it's so good to be with everyone. Glasses issues means that there's some way we can't see clearly, right? There's a kind of confusion. And one of the things that we need to do here is we need to, in some, huge way, we need to clear our glasses, right? We need to clear our glasses. We need to be able to see clearly. Homo Amor needs to be able to clear glasses, to clarify my interior, right? To be able to stand in love, to be able to stand in Eros. And the level of confusion, which is not at all surprising if you've tracked and understood the fabric of interior culture. It's not surprising, but sometimes, you know what I mean, friend? Something can be not surprising, but shocking. Okay, not surprising, but shocking. And so we need to clarify our prisms. Okay, and I want to try and do that today in a very tender fashion, but fierce, tender and fierce, audacious and, gentle, and try and come to something new. So the inability to distinguish between a jihadi culture of death and a fundamental culture of life, which may have 1,000 problems, but is fundamentally a culture of life, undermines the capacity to be Homo Amor. So we need to be able to make that distinction. So the first requirement of Homo Amor is we feel the joy. Listen deep. Let's listen deep to each other. Let's go deep in. We feel the joy, the pulsing joy of the world. And when there's pain, we feel the pulsing pain of the world. And no one's blood is cheap. Ukrainian blood's not cheap, and Yemenite blood's not cheap, and Jewish blood's not cheap, and yellow blood's not cheap, and black blood's not cheap, and Palestinian blood is not cheap. All blood has the same value, the same intrinsic value. No one's blood is cheap. And we need to be able to make fundamental distinctions between a jihadi culture of death and at least an aspiring culture of life that needs to respond to it. It's point one. Point two. In order to be able to respond to the culture of death, we have to first understand it, and then we need to embrace a new story of value. Because from where we stand today, we don't have the capacity as Homo Amor to respond to the culture of death. So I'm going to ask David to read a code. David's going to read a code for us. And thank you, David. Most awesome code reader. David is coded with codes. And we're going to go into this code and try and outline Barbie, the movie Barbie, Hamas, and the new story. Those are the three options we have for the world today. Barbie, as we'll see, will lead to a nihilistic destruction. Hamas will lead to a puritanical destruction. And only a new story of value, which realizes with mad joy that the universe is a love story, that I participate in that love story, that no one's outside the circle. And that realization is based not simply on declaration, but on a careful reading and a careful direct experience of the realization of both of the hard sciences and what I would call the interior sciences. It's only such a realization. It's only such an evolution of culture and consciousness. It's only such a progression of moral grasp and understanding. It's only such a progression of ethos rooted in a realization of Eros that can actually respond and move us from horror to hope. That can actually create the new world, the most beautiful world that we've always known is possible. The refusal to make distinctions contravenes the interior of Homo Amor. Love is not merely a feeling. I haven't stopped feeling. I feel insanely. Right? I'm, by nature an empath, so I feel all the time. I'm always feeling. I've actually, if I can just share with you for a second, I've never, quite literally, never had a good idea in my life. Any idea, any dharma, any set of distinctions that I'm trying to articulate together with Zach and the gang here in CosmoErotic Humanism come from a deep feeling, a felt sense. And then I try and articulate the feeling as it stays with me day in and day out. I try and articulate the feeling and then share it with Kirsten, with Zach, with KK, with Lirazi, right, with Shahati, right, with Krista, right, with Tahili, with David, right, with Jacqueline, right, with Jamie, right, and others with everyone, right, with Eugis, right, and we try and kind of Suzette, right, we try and I go down the list, right, and they're all of us, but I'm trying to share a feeling and then to articulate it in a distinction. So we have to feel, but it's only our capacity to feel and articulate this new story of value that can allow us to move from horror to hope, from the hope, which is a memory of the future. So we're going to try and do as much as we can, a very, very, and I'm looking at the time in case I'm just checking on time. I want to do like a very succinct articulation and try and see really clearly in a way that perhaps we never have as clearly, right? What our options are. Our options are Barbie, option one. We're going to unpack the Barbie option. Hamas, option two. The CosmoErotic universe, CosmoErotic humanism, a new story of value, option three. So David, take us inside. Let's read this code and let's love this open together, my friends, for the sake of the evolution of love.
So here's this week's evolutionary love code. There are three universe stories. There is the Barbie universe story, there is the Hamas universe story, or the fundamentalist universe story, and there's different forms of fundamentalism. And then there is the Homo Amor, CosmoErotic humanism story, the new story of value. Those are the three choices that we have today. It's not a binary choice. We need to find a third way. We need to find our way between the binary of Barbie and Hamas, between postmodern, desiccated, empty materialism and a pseudo-erotic fundamentalism, which is wildly destructive. The third way is the new story of value rooted in evolving first principles and first values, CosmoErotic humanism. One more time for you. There are three universe stories. There is the Barbie universe story, There is the Hamas universe story, or the fundamentalist universe story, and there are multiple forms of fundamentalism. And then there is the Homo Amor CosmoErotic humanism, the new story of value. Those are the three choices that we have today. It's not a binary choice. We actually need to find a third way. We need to find our way between the binary of Barbie and Hamas, between postmodern, desiccated, empty materialism, and a pseudo-erotic fundamentalism, which is wildly destructive. The third way is the new story of value rooted in evolving first principles and first values, cosmoerotic humanism. And I turn my word back to you, beloved Dr. Mark.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. And I apologize. It's somewhat of an insincere apology. I'm a little bit intense, right? In general, I'm a little bit intense. So I have to apologize, and sincere apology for that. I feel the world intensely. And I've been told many times, just say things, kind of in a very quiet voice and speak slowly. And people think that that's profound. So I'm not real good at that. So I apologize, for the intensity, but it's the intensity of joy. So let's be with me in the intensity of joy and the intensity of delight and the intensity of the felt pathos, the pain, right? The ability to feel each other's joy and to feel each other's pain is what makes us human and what makes human beings divine. So let's step in. David, thank you for the code. And I'll ask for the code again in a little bit. And if I seem a little hesitant, it's because I want to see if I can, in literally this very short amount of time, really do this with you. Are we ready? Are we ready to participate in the evolution of love? Are we ready to be audacious and bold and humble and to create a new world together? So step one, stories matter. Stories matter. Story is the very structure of reality itself. Story is not a human invention. Story is ontological to cosmos. So in interior sciences, there's a phrase that we sometimes use, which is God loves stories. But that's another way of talking about story as structural to reality. Don't worry if you're confused about God. As we often say, the God you don't believe in doesn't exist. It's okay. And the God that you deny, I deny also. When we talk about God, we mean the field of value, which is infinitely personal. The field of value, which is infinitely personal. We have a name that we use to refer to the divine that both lives in us and holds us in CosmoErotic humanism. And that name is the infinite intimate. God is the infinite intimate, the infinite that desires intimacy and who becomes somehow paradoxically more infinite through desiring intimacy and through realizing ever deeper intimacies. And if that seems like it's impossible, think about mathematical sets and think about Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which says that you can never have a complete set of mathematical sets. So just like you have a Gödel's incompleteness theorem in the exterior sciences, and my dear friend Daniel Schmachtergeber, Daniel and I have been talking intensely for 8-9 years. He's a key fellow at the center and doing his own projects. And so Daniel and I did a deep dive kind of conversation on Gödel's incompleteness theorem as applied to interiors. And that's precisely what I'm calling the infinite intimate, the infinity of intimacy that becomes more through becoming intimate. So step one, we said, was God loves stories. And reality is a story. God loves stories. And Elena, this clarification is for you. God loves stories as an expression of the ontology, the very structure of reality being a story. Now, why does that matter so insanely much in this very moment? So, two steps, and they're dramatic steps and they're painful steps. One, false stories confuse us. I'll give you an example of a false story. The atrocity that took place on October 7th, and I'm gonna detail for about a minute for a very specific reason, not for the sake of playing over a snuff film, not for any sake of joy in repeating it, but for a very specific moral reason. I'm going to repeat one dimension of that atrocity in a few minutes. But for now, let me just say that, and we're going to get to joy today, we're going to get to major joy. But let me just say that the atrocity took place because of the interior logic of Hamas, which is a failed love story. And last week we talked about Hamas as a failed love story. And it has nothing to do with the occupation. Whatever the occupation means, that word doesn't even mean anything. It's an overused trope. The occupation of Gaza, who's occupying Gaza? What does it even mean? Where's Gaza? When was it part of Egypt? Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza. Hamas took it over, threw out Fatah, and basically massacres and kills its citizens at will in order to hold them captive for its own jihadi aims. So whenever someone says the occupation of Gaza, clearly they actually don't know what they're referring to and have no sense of the storyline. And stories matter. But two, I'll give you a better piece of evidence. If you study the history of the Islamic State, to one of the Atlantic writers, Graham Wood, I think, wrote a book on kind of the strangers, right? The kind of that's in the title. It's about the Islamic State and strangers, and it's about the story of the Islamic State, ISIS, in Iraq and Syria. But of course, there was no occupation there. There was no West Bank. There was no Israel. There were no Jews, and there was no occupation. And still, the Islamic State acted with barbarity and cruelty and atrocity of the same nature. Or if you see the movie, Hotel Mumbai, right, which is about another jihadi set of atrocities, which killed some 160 people. Again, there's no Israel there, and there's no occupation, and there's no Zionist entity, or none of those smoke screens. And jihad does what jihad does. That's really critical to understand. So in other words, it's very clear that Hamas, although quite distinct from ISIS, as Wood has pointed out, nonetheless is operating in the fundamental logic of a culture of death. But we're going to go much, much deeper than that. That's just the very beginning. But clearly that's not about an occupation. One, because the word doesn't make sense in the Gaza context. But number two, because just remove, how do you know the difference between a reason and an excuse? So if you remove the excuse, does the phenomena still exist? Right? That's a very good distinction. So if the reason for a Hamas set of atrocities is a response to, right, a political agenda, right, which is opposed by Israel, well, then remove Israel, remove Jews, remove any of those factors, and will jihadism still carry out its atrocities? The answer is yes. Point, whatever the political sets of issues are in Gaza or the West Bank, they are not cause. And by the way, parentheses, based on all the polls today, Hamas would win an election in the West Bank. Just to understand that. So let's just hold that. But let's go deeper. I want to go deeper because I want to get something much deeper. This is just the surface. We're on the surface now. Deeper. This is critical to understand. Hamas is not a group of sociopaths. I want to get really clear about that. If Hamas was a group of sociopaths, okay, right? And again, right? And again, I want to be really clear, right? And someone just wrote in the chat box, thank you, Angus, right? This is not jihad, it's pseudo-jihad. Well, it's jihad as it's, right? The most important thing that could happen in the world today would be that the interpretation of jihad as an internal struggle for liberation would be accepted. That would be, Angus, right? The most beautiful, gorgeous evolution. That has not happened. We need 2 billion Muslims to arise in the world and say what jihad means is internal transformation. Amen. Hallelujah. That is what needs to happen. We need an evolution of consciousness within Islam. However, if you read the classical interpretations that the Shia and Sunni communities that are dominating the discourse have adopted, jihad is very centrally about violence and war, with Muhammad as the model. And that is their interpretation of jihad that they're now enacting. And Angus is 1,000% right that we need an evolution of what jihad means. And that would actually, right, be probably one of the most pivotal evolutions of consciousness that we could actually enact. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Now let's just stay with the thread. Okay, because I want to see if we can get this thread. It's critical to understand. Hamas are not sociopaths. They're not psychopaths. I mean, there might be a random sociopath and psychopath in there, maybe even more than a few, like there always is. But that if and this is critical, if Hamas was just basically a group of mafia, sociopaths, we would have a much smaller problem. No, the whole point is that Hamas is ordinary people who are fundamentally psychologically sound, who have been completely absorbed in a failed love story in which the acts that are carried out are an expression of an utterly distorted version of Homo Amor, or of a love story. Right? It's actually the opposite of Homo Amor. Homo Amor is actually an actual love story, but it's the opposite. It's the utter degradation of a love story. That's the point. And that's what we saw last week when we played a particular video, right? It wasn't a video, it was an audio of this young man, Mahmoud, I think his name was, right? Who calls home and he says, I killed 10 Jews and I just killed this woman and I have her phone and I'm calling you with her phone and I'm sending images of the Jews that I just killed with my own hands, right, to my WhatsApp. And his father's there and says, you killed 10 Jews. And his mother's there crying. But there's a shared conversation between them. There's a shared culture. As I said a couple of weeks ago, I said, maybe 2-3 weeks ago when this first began, I said, compare this to the My Lai massacre, Lieutenant Calley and the My Lai massacre in Medina, I think it was Sergeant Medina, right, in Vietnam. Can you imagine Calley and Medina calling home to Wyoming and Nebraska, right, and telling, right, their parents, wow, I just killed 10 people. Parents would be horrified. You're out of your mind. What the fuck happened to you? That's not what happens in this phone call, right? There's a culture of jihad. And when father says, or one of the friends say on the call, come home, he says, what do you mean come home? Right? Martyrdom, victory or martyrdom, including martyrdom is where Mahmoud was going. So Mahmoud's not evil in the sense that, right, he's expressing a psychopathy, right? He's not a psychopath. He's not a sociopath. Right? In other words, he's a normal person with some elemental psychological soundness. And this is far, far more dangerous, trapped in a failed love story. I mean, and just ask O.J. Simpson what it means to be trapped in a failed love story. Right? And point being, right, a failed love story on a personal level is O.J. Simpson, which results in murder. But a failed love story on a collective level, right, results in, right, in horror. Right? In the 14th century, it resulted in the horrors of the Crusades and burning heretics alive and flaying their skin. Right? And in the jihadist moment, it results in this ultimate violation of Homo Amor and in the unimaginable atrocities, right, of October 7th. But that's just the context. None of this is what we want to talk about. Okay, that's just our context. And the context is story matters, right? The story you tell matters. Let's stay very, very close. So we have three stories that are all happening within a few weeks of each other. One that's happening, right? It's in the movie theaters, right? And in lots of the United States as the Hamas atrocities are happening, and that's Barbie. So this is culture telling a story. This is the intimate universe whispering, and we're trying to step out of the horror of social media feeds, right? And they're being utterly lost, and so often the saddest dimensions of human beings, right? Because their architecture and their incentive structures are perverse and rewards, right, the lowest common denominator of human expression all too often. Right? So let's get out of social media feeds. Let's get out of a kind of unimaginably superficial set of distortions colored by any number of motivations, right, of the kind, right, that exist in so much of the legacy press. For example, X amount of time ago, 10 days ago, when a hospital was bombed, and Hamas immediately said Israel did this, and Israel said, well, of course not, right? The New York Times and BBC and Reuters and The Guardian all reported, based on Hamas, that Israel did it without any check of any kind of substantive kind. This is supposed to be the legacy institutions of the press. And it turned out, based on all the available intelligence from multiple vectors, of course, not to be true. But so what caused the press to do that? What caused our legacy press institutions to do that is a deeper conversation we're not going to have now. But let's get out of those vectors, both out of the legacy press and out of the social media feeds. And let's kind of look clearly with our hearts wide open, right? Our intention is to come to joy. Our intention is the evolution of love. Our intention is to clean our glasses, to see clearly. So what's the Barbie story about? And we talked about this for 2 or 3 meetings in one mountain. And at the core, what we said is, and I want to just look at one clip for a second, which is this moment where the Will Ferrell character, or Sasha, actually, the daughter who's a key figure in the movie, right? Her mother is the artist who works for Mattel, who's thinking about death and drawing Barbie with cellulite, right? And it's her mother who kind of attracts Barbie. Her daughter is Sasha, and the relationship between Sasha and her mother is a key dimension, a key beautiful vector actually in the story. It's the most beautiful vector in an otherwise tragic and broken narrative. So there's a certain moment. Let's see the clip. We'll explain the clip, and we'll go right to the point. Let's see that clip for a second. Okay, from Barbie. Here we go. Let's take a look.
Hey, what about Barbie?
What do you mean?
What's her ending? What does she get?
Well, that's easy. She's in love with Ken.
That is not her ending.
I'm not in love with Ken.
So if you follow the movie carefully, what Barbie's not saying here is, I'm not in love with this Ken. This is not a personal Barbie and a personal Ken. Barbie and Ken here are archetypes. They are these two parts, right, in this larger system. And the question is there a love story in the system or isn't there? And the entire point and plot of Barbie is that there is no love story. So Barbie says to Ken when he moves to kiss her in the beginning, he says, what are you doing? And he says, well, maybe I'll stay over. And he says, well, why would you stay over? It's girls' night every night forever. Eternity is not about eternal love. Eternity is not about a love story. There is no love story. And if you read carefully, and we'll do an entire one mountain on this in the next few weeks, if you read the texts of the songs, right, the key songs, right, Closer to Fine is one of them, and I'm Just Ken, Ken's song. You read the texts of the songs, the point of the song says, there's no love story. Barbie's not in love with Ken means Barbie's not in love with Ken, period. Right? Love is not the end of the story. It's not where we're going. It's not just a healthy individuation, which is what we'd like to understand Barbie as. Ken has to individuate and Barbie has to individuate, and then they come together in this new Eros and this larger love. Right? They've got to get out of the kind of first stage love. They've got to individuate and then come together. That's exactly not what Barbie's saying. If you read the text at all carefully, Barbie's saying there's no love story. And in fact, there's an incredible scene where Barbie is talking to Ruth, Mrs. Mattel, right, the founder of Mattel, and she says, "I want to become human." And Mrs. Mattel, Ruth says, like, "Why?" And Mrs. Mattel describes human beings and says, in the end, they die. Death, that's the end, it's over. And so they just make up meaning along the way. That they just basically make shit up because the whole thing is this fleeting thing. And why would you want to join that? And no answer to that question, right, is given in Barbie. It's very, very different than that moment in Tolkien, who's writing in Oxford in the middle of the 20th century, and he's writing the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and Arwen, who's an eternal or close to eternal elf, right, Elvine princess, decides she wants to become human, even if she loses her eternity, in order to be with Aragorn. She wants to be with Aragorn because reality is a love story, and because love is an eternal value of reality itself. So to step into love is to step into eternity. That's precisely not what's happening in Barbie. So Barbie is a world in which death ends life, which after death, there's only nothingness. There's no field of value. Humans make it up. It's not real. And so therefore, the closest that Barbie can get to a love story is biological, because the biological reality, for example, of mother and daughter. So the relationship between Sasha and her mother, what's her mother's name? Is it Gloria? I'm trying to remember her mother's name. But the relationship between Sasha and her mother, Gloria, right? That's the love story. There are about 5 or 6 scenes where that biological love story unfolds. And even Ruth says, I named Barbie after my daughter, Barbara. So it's the mother-daughter feminine, because the masculine's demonized in Barbie. So it's the mother-daughter feminine biological love story. That's as close as we can get to a love story. But really the core is there is no love story. That's Barbie's point. So there's no love story because love itself is not a value, right? Because Eros itself, right, is not an intrinsic value of cosmos. You have a postmodern desiccation, a postmodern, as Lewis Mumford called it, disqualification of the universe. There is no field of value, and there's no ultimate distinction between right and wrong. That distinction can't be drawn. It's an arbitrary distinction. And as one writer who I've cited often, who's a kind of parrot of postmodernism, and intelligent and lovely and urbane and witty parrot, right, with lots of good stories to tell and lots of intelligence, Yuval Harari. Right? But Yuval basically says there's no difference at all in any ultimate sense between massacring Muslims in the 14th century as a Christian young knight and between going to that same region of the world to work to heal refugees for Amnesty International. He says quite explicitly, those are both just made up stories, and in a few hundred years, right, the story we tell now, the Amnesty International story, the positive Western values story, that story will also seem absurd to us. Right? So there's no ultimate distinction. And again, Harari's not, I'm not citing him as a thinker. He's not important as a thinker. He's important as a kind of uncontaminated and unconscious parrot of the Barbie predicament, which is that there is no love story. Now, stay close. When there's no love story, all you get is the drive for power. All you get is rivalrous conflict, which is governed by win-lose metrics. And what you get is, right, is a war machine. You get a military industrial complex. You get a medical industrial complex. In other words, you get the lowest common denominator of human drives, which are drives of pseudo-eros. So if there's no real Eros, if there's no Eros value in cosmos, because Eros is not just Eros is the movement of separate parts. Eros is the experience of radical aliveness. That's the Eros equation. Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness, desiring, because reality is desire, separate parts desiring, deeper contact and greater wholeness. That's the Eros equation. That's actually the new universe story. But if that doesn't exist, we're going to get to that. But if that doesn't exist, then all desire is just contrived. Eros is not a value because there is no real value. If there's real value, what value means, if there's real value, and this is the new universe story that we're going to talk about in the last 4 minutes, the new universe story, desire is real. It's a value of cosmos. And when you clarify desire, Clarified desire tells you actually what you value. So I clarify my desire. Desire is an appropriate and legitimate and important compass. There's this compass of desire. I follow my compass of desire. I follow my clarified compass of desire in order to disclose value. So Eros is a value. Eros is a value of cosmos. But if there's no Eros, right, then there's only emptiness. And in the emptiness, we try and fill it up because we can't bear the emptiness. Now, the postmodern materialist has no explanation of why we can't bear the emptiness. Existentialism describes, Sartre, Camus, describe with great grotesque detail the experience of emptiness, but they ignore the question of why is the emptiness there? Why do we feel this emptiness if we're but desiccated, flatland, postmodern, mechanical humans without any intrinsic value? They can't explain that. But bracket that for a second. If there's no Eros, there's pseudo-Eros. Pseudo-Eros appears in many forms. One form of pseudo-Eros is a military-industrial complex. This flexing of muscle, right? This drive to war, the war machine, empire, as it's been called. And so postmodernity can produce war machines, right? And war machines benefit from wars. And whenever there's a war, you always have to try and see where's the war machine. Where's the hidden war machine? What's actually... So post-modernity creates a moral vacuum. Moral vacuums benefit war machines, right, that actually traffic, right, in raw power. And we always just have to be aware, is there a war machine someplace right here, someplace in the background, and feel where it is? And not all war machines are the same, right? And there are wars that need to be fought, right? As I've talked about, as the Dalai Lama has talked about, right? Pacifism is not actually an option if I'm actually taking responsibility for love and for the present and for the future. But bracket that for a second, right? Out of kind of the Barbie affirmation, claim, dogmatic claim, right? That there is no love story because there's no field of value. And therefore, there's no Eros value in cosmos. So what emerges is pseudo-Eros that goes to destroy everything, right? Through its rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics. Okay, so that's one direction. Okay, so let's be really clear though. So in this direction, desire is not a value of cosmos. Desire is not sacred, right? Desire, I can't listen to my desire. My clarified desire means nothing. It just means the social construction that dominates who I am. There is no free choice. There is no choosing of direction, right? It's an illusion, right? It's made up. And my experience of freedom is dismissed because my experience is dismissed. And my desire for freedom is dismissed because desire has no ontology. And it has no reality. It has no ultimate moral force. Okay? So that's the first story. So what is Barbie? A failed love story. A failed story of desire. Now, friends, stay close. What is Hamas? Hamas is in the same way, right? And a complete, excuse me, Hamas is in a completely different way, the same interior structure. And obviously there's zero moral equivalence between Barbie and Hamas, obviously. But in terms of its interior structure, Hamas is a failed love story, meaning there is no universal grammar of value, which is rooted in Eros. So there's no universal field of Eros. Reality is divided in only one way. It's not divided between regions or geographies or nations, certainly not nation states. Reality is divided in one way. Dar el Harb and Dar el Islam, those who should be subjugated by the brutality of the sword, and those who are purified by the only pure version of Islam. And whether it's the Sunni version or the Shia version of jihad is a deathly argument between those versions of jihad, but what they share is that only a purified Islam, right, is worthy of care and concern or love. So it's a failed love story, number one. But number two, the body is demonized. So I want to get this clearly, what this means. The body is demonized. The stirrings of desire in the body are demonized. Masturbation has no place. Self-pleasuring has no place. The joy of making love, right? Within the right and sacred context, but the joy of making love has no place. That's critical. The body can't be trusted. The strings of desire in the body can't be trusted. Martyrdom, right? The rejection of the embodied manifest reality is at the center of the conversation. Okay? Now, if the body can't be trusted, stay close. And I experience deep in my body the stirring of desire, which is in violation of the purified version of Islam, which has animated my consciousness from early childhood. And yet I feel that desire in me, so I feel that kind of evil in me. So I can't own that evil, so I project it outwards. Does everyone get that? I can't own that evil, I project it outwards on the other, on the enemy, on the infidel, who needs to be slaughtered by the sword and painfully. So Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States, reports, right, firsthand testimony, right? And this is necessary to say. We're talking about families being tied together, children and parents, with the limbs of the children, fingers, legs cut off, right? We're talking about phalluses, right, of men cut off before they're raped women, right? And then everyone burned alive. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about, right, this most torturous, most brutal, most vicious, to inflict the most pain possible, right, to cut a girl's arm off and leave her without killing her intentionally, so she'll wallow for 7 hours in her pain with intention. That's the intention. And then she quivers and dies in the end as one of the first responders arrives, right, hours later. Because the experience of desire has been degraded, because desire is not holy, right? So Barbie in its way disqualifies desire. Desire is not real. Desire doesn't tell me anything real about reality. It doesn't lead me, right? Desire, Eros, right? Desire, which is the face of Eros, doesn't lead me to ethos. In the Hamas version, desire is not just disqualified, but degraded and demonized, and therefore the body can be violated, right? And anti-desire, torture, is the opposite of desire, is inflicted in the name of this purity, because the experience of interior desire, which is experienced as evil, is projected out. And then that desire is then killed and destroyed and violated, because that's the interior logic of the jihadi position. Not because they're sociopaths, not because they're psychopaths, because that's what the good martyr does inherently. And that's why, even though the details of all these killings were known, they were celebrated. But they were celebrated, stay close, on two different streets. They were celebrated on the postmodern street in universities across the world, including the best of Western liberal universities, who lived in a postmodern predicament in which there's no field of value. When there's no field of value, you can't do evaluation. You can't evaluate anything, right? One. Two, there's no field of value. You can't evaluate anything. But two, it's celebrated on the street in which jihad is celebrated. And even if one's not an active jihadi, there's an enormous sympathy to jihad throughout huge swaths of reality. So you've got this celebration of atrocity, both on the postmodern street, because there is no universal love story, because there is no Eros value, because there's no field of Eros and no field of value. And since there's no field of value, I can't evaluate. I don't know how to make distinctions. Evaluation makes distinction. We lose that capacity, which is where moral equivalences come from. Right? Equivalences, right? I can't distinguish between valences. And on the sympathy to jihadi street, right, there's this demonized, degraded desire, which allows for, right, an embrace of this jihadi worldview, which is then celebrated, right, in huge rallies, right, around the world. So I want to catch that and feel that. So what's the third possibility? The third possibility is a return to Eros. But it's not a return, it's the articulation for the first time, right, of the realization that the universe is a love story. Okay, now stay close. I'm going to try and do this just in 6 steps. So we've said many, many times, right, that existential risk is because you can't have a global existential risk, which is global, one. Existential risk is always a global challenge, right? Climate change, right? Artificial intelligence. It's always global. Gap between haves and have-nots. Global challenges require global solutions. One, global solutions require global coordination. Two, global coordination requires global resonance or global coherence. We need global coherence in order to resonate with each other, in order to coordinate. Global coherence requires global intimacy, right? 4, 5, global intimacy, right, requires, like intimacy in any relationship, shared value, a shared story of value. But there is no shared story of value, right? We've got a degraded fundamentalist value, and we've got a desiccated, disqualified value, Barbie and Hamas, right? Both swelling movements in the world, postmodernity against fundamentalism, both failed love stories. But we don't have a shared story of value. Only a shared story of value, right, can respond to existential risk, which is the death of humanity or the death of our humanity. Okay? So a disqualified value produces military-industrial complex, but it also produces techno-feudalism, a technocratic totalitarianism, which actually is structured to undermine free will and to undermine choice and to appeal to the lowest common denominator of human being. And we're about to put out a full 150,000 word volume kind of describing techno-feudalism, right, which is the aim of the MIT Media Lab, for example, which subscribes to the notion of a disqualified value, of there being no field of value. And then you've got the fundamentalist position, right, which says, no, as we've described it, right, the demonization of desire and all of its, right, utter horror. So what's the response? The response has to be, those are the two choices. The response has to be a third way. And in the third way, it's the third possibility. It's this new allurement, is the realization that actually, the universe is a love story. That's why failed love stories are so dangerous. And that actually Eros is the ground of reality. Reality is Eros. And Eros is the value of reality. Eros and intimacy, seeking ever deeper uniqueness, ever deeper diversity, and then ever larger unions from that diversity. Ever deeper goodness, truth, and beauty, right? Reality seeks value. Reality has an appetite for value. Reality is desire. Let's just put in the chat box just for 1 second. It's 2:00. Just for 1 second, we'll put it in the chat box, the name of God. We'll just look at it for 1 minute, right? Thank you. When you actually look at the name of God, which in the interior sciences, and these are the interior sciences of Hebrew wisdom, for example, but it exists in every tradition. The interior sciences of Hebrew wisdom animated the Renaissance. You look at the name of God. The name of God is Yud, right? Going from right to left, Yud. The Yud, it's the 4-letter name of God. The Yud enters the Hey. Yah, as in Leonard Cohen, hallelujah. The breath of reality is the Yud entering the Hey and mad Eros. And then the Vav enters the Hey. The 3rd letter enters the Hey, right? Again, in mad Eros. And the Yud entering the Hey is called the constant Eros of Cosmos, electromagnetism, gravitational allurement, the strong and weak nuclear forces, the structure of reality. And the Vav entering the Hey is the aroused, called the aroused Eros in the interior sciences. And we can let the image go. And the aroused Eros is the Eros generated by that same quality of allurement and desire operating, right, at the depth of human self-reflective consciousness. But reality is, right, in the interior sciences, reality is names of God, which is really just another way of saying that reality is allurement. Reality is Eros. Reality is desire, and desire means I'm seeking value. I'm desiring ever greater value. Reality, right, has an appetite, wrote Whitehead, for value. That's a love story. The universe is a love story. The universe is animated by desire, and I can trust my desire, and my desire tells me truth. I can trust my body. Do you feel that? The book of Job says, as it's read by the interior sciences in chapter 19, says, through my body, I vision God. Meaning, I can trust my body, the stirrings of desire in my body, not in their pseudo-erotic form, not in their addictive form, not in their broken form, but my clarified desire discloses value. And it's my desire for creativity. And it's my desire for caring. It's my desire for nurturing. It's my desire for responsibility. It's my desire for aliveness. It's my desire for union. It's my desire for ever deeper intimacies, for ever deeper truth-telling, for ever deeper transformation, for ever deeper uniqueness. These are the first principles and first values of Cosmos, which are the first desires of Cosmos. The first desires of Cosmos are its first values, and the whole thing is a love story, which is why one text says, Istakel be'oraita. She looked in the text, and the text is the names of God. Ubara alma, and the world is an expression of the names of God, meaning reality is desire. God is Eros, all the way up and all the way down. And we are unique participatory expressions of the field of Eros, unique self, unique qualities, incarnations of intimacy and desire. That's a love story. And ethos comes from that love story. When there's no love story, when Eros is not a value, you have emptiness, you have pseudo-eros. Whether it's the postmodern version of pseudo-eros or the fundamentalist version of pseudo-eros, they both produce destruction. Our response has to be the overriding moral imperative of this time, like it was for Da Vinci and Ficino at the Florentine Platonic Academy in the Renaissance, which was a time between worlds and a time between stories. Zach and I called this moment in time a time between worlds and a time between stories. In this moment, in this breach, we have to not just tell, not just declare. We have to actually articulate, to research, to deepen, to write, to clarify, right? The evolution of the human story, which is reality is a love story. No one's outside of the love story. Love is the value of Cosmos, the Eros value. We all participate in that story. We all have unique contributions to that love story. That love story is evolving. It's clarifying all the time. That's the universal love story. And that love story has got to be so powerful and so pulsing and so throbbing that it awakens Barbie and Ken. It's clarified scientifically that actually the Hamas apostate, the person who leaves Hamas, doesn't become a postmodernist, which is what's happening. Those who leave Hamas go to Europe and they become, postmodern apostates because the choice is either Hamas or postmodernism. No, we have to actually initiate reality, as Da Vinci and Ficino did, into this new love story, grounded in the best of sciences. Wow. Okay, that's where we're going. That's what we're here to do. It's Barbie or Hamas? No, it's the universal love story.